Welcome back. This is a place for quiet stories from the wizarding world. The paths canon never walked, the choices that might have changed everything. Here, we take a single moment and turn it slightly. We follow the consequences slowly, carefully, year by year. If you enjoy these long, immersive journeys into alternate magic, consider subscribing and settling in. Now, let's start. The wizarding world tells itself a comforting story about the boy who lived, that his survival was an accident of love, a miracle of sacrificial magic that left him fundamentally safe, harmless. They are wrong. Our opening image is not the Sorting Hat trembling over an uncertain first year. It is Harry Potter alone in the library's spine-like shadows, deep in the restricted section, long after curfew has turned Hogwarts into a sleeping fortress. His wand tip burns a narrow line of light across a page bound in dragonhide, the ink moving as if it resents being read. The title is in a language no 11-year-old should recognize, let alone pronounce, a ritual that should have died with the last Dark Lord. In this timeline, the first great lie is that Harry is naturally Gryffindor, impulsive, bright, protected by friendship and luck. The truth is colder. From the moment he realizes the shelves labeled restricted are not a warning, but an invitation, Harry understands that the world has hidden its most tactically lethal knowledge behind a curtain of moral theatre. He steps through, quietly, deliberately, a weapon being polished in the dark. We are accustomed to reading his victories as accidents of courage. The troll, the stone, the basilisk. Yet imagine a compressed montage, replayed with the film subtly overexposed. In the Chamber of Secrets, the jet of red that slams into the serpent is not a schoolyard stunning spell, but something older, its light edged in sickly green, leaving the scales smoking where it strikes. In the Little Hangleton graveyard, the shield he throws up against Voldemort's killing curse is not the translucent dome we remember, but a dense, oil-dark barrier whose surface hums with soul resonance, reflecting not light, but intent. In the Department of Mysteries, Death Eaters do not simply fall, they crumple with bones shattered at angles that make even Bellatrix falter. The central contrarian claim of this analysis is simple. Harry's real power was never luck, never prophecy, never even love, as Dumbledore so piously defined it. His true advantage was the willingness to touch the magic even Voldemort feared, rituals that twist the soul without quite breaking it, curses that are not unforgivable only because the Ministry never discovered them, and to hide that decision from everyone who believed they held authority over him. This raises the guiding question of the Slytherin timeline we are about to chart. If Harry secretly studies forbidden magic from his first year, does he become the one wizard capable of ending Voldemort with methodical certainty, or the proof that the world never needed a new hero, only a different Dark Lord? The difference in this world may be measured in which secrets he chooses to share and which he buries beneath the castle. Across this video, we will trace that divergence year by year, spell by spell, relationship by relationship. We will watch how a single night in the restricted section metastasizes, how Hermione becomes first accomplice, then conscience, how Ron senses power without understanding its cost, how Snape recognizes techniques that should not exist outside vanished wartime manuals, and how Dumbledore's twinkling gaze hardens, frame by frame, into surveillance. Mentorship becomes containment. The headmaster is no longer merely guiding a child, he is guarding the world from a masterpiece to be molded that he did not design. By the end, the question will not be whether Harry wins the war, it will be what survives him. Halloween, 1991. The night the library looked back. Halloween 1991 is where the legend fractures. The feast is over, the troll is dead, and the school congratulates itself on surviving chaos it never truly controlled. They are wrong. In the hospital wing, under 2 bright lamps and the faint antiseptic tang of Skelly Grow, an 11-year-old boy lies awake and understands, with brutal clarity, that his survival was an accident of geography and other people's spells. A troll's club nearly crushed his skull. Ron's wand backfired. Teachers arrived late. Harry Potter tastes helplessness as a physical flavor on his tongue. It is intolerable. Canon insists that this night binds friendships and cements houses. In this timeline, it does something colder. It forges intent. When sleep refuses him, Harry does not wander for adventure. He walks the corridors with a single nascent objective: never again to be the weakest presence in the room when death enters. The castle responds. Stone arches lean inward, torches gutter as he passes, and the silence acquires a listening quality, as if Hogwarts itself is evaluating a new variable in an old equation. By the time he reaches the 3rd floor corridor, he is not following a map. He is following resonance, a faint pull behind his scar that feels like pressure before a storm. Later, Dumbledore will claim he merely left the invisibility cloak in Harry's path as a sentimental gesture. Perhaps, but when Harry's fingers close around that silvery fabric outside the hospital wing, it feels less like a gift and more like a key the castle has been waiting to hand him. Under the cloak, the world becomes muted, narrowed to breath and heartbeat, and the soft slap of his trainers on ancient stone. He does not seek a mirror. He seeks explanations. Death, protection, the name Voldemort that adults wrap in euphemism and fear. The restricted section is not a forbidden destination. It is a methodical certainty. Inside, the air is thicker, humming. As Harry passes certain shelves, certain spines shiver, clasps twitch, ink sigils flare and subside. Whispers rise not in his ears but in his bones. The fragment of riddle, bound into his scar, recognizes its own ecology. This is the first articulation of soul resonance, books of calculated cruelty and binding theory responding to a boy who is already, unknowingly, a divided soul walking. One volume does not simply wait to be chosen. It leans, black leather, no title, sealed with a band of tarnished silver etched in concentric circles around a stylized eye. When his hand brushes it, the band unclasps with an audible sigh, as if relieved. The pages inside are densely annotated diagrams of mines rendered like fortresses under siege, arrows marking intrusion routes, sigils for memory excision, protocols for binding oaths that constrict like chains if broken. The language is clinical, mercilessly precise. No melodrama, only procedures. Warnings line the margins in a cramped, authoritative script. This knowledge stains. Application constitutes war upon the self. Harry reads them and does not look away. A weapon being polished in the dark does not flinch from its own edge. Here, the reframing is quiet but absolute. Harry is no longer the passive beneficiary of sacrificial love. He is a living junction of two magics, light protection and dark fragmentation. A masterpiece to be molded by whoever reaches him first. The book does not teach Horcruxes yet, but it teaches him that minds can be shielded, that promises can be enforced. That power is not merely what spell you cast, but what bindings you understand. When he finally closes it, hours later, his reflection in the library window is not a hero in training. It is an unfinished weapon, studying its own schematics, already imagining completion. From this night forward, the boy who lived begins to plan, not how to survive the next year, but how to one day exercise true authority over life, death, and a war he now assumes is coming. And Hogwarts, having looked back, will not stop answering him. A hidden curriculum, Harry's secret first-year syllabus. Hogwarts answers him with a timetable, not the parchment one McGonagall hands out, but a hidden schedule of gaps, blind spots, and silences that only a child trained in deprivation would notice. In this timeline, Harry maps the castle the way Bellatrix once taught him to map an enemy mind. Probe, retreat, record, refine. Halloween becomes a prototype operation, not an exception, a rehearsal for a curriculum no professor will ever acknowledge. He starts with Filch. The man's fury is loud, but his habits are dull. Patrols drag in predictable loops from trophy room to library to dungeons, a metronome of resentment. Hermione's obsession with schedules becomes another asset. Every time she insists they maximize study efficiency, Harry quietly notes when she will be in the common room, when Ron will be distracted by chess, when the Gryffindor corridor will be empty. The invisibility cloak is not a marvel to him. It is infrastructure. Within a fortnight, there is a pattern. Tuesday, after dinner, when Hermione has arithmancy revision charts to perfect, and Ron is complaining about Snape. Thursday, just before curfew, when Filch lingers near the kitchens to harass elves. Under the cloak, Harry slips from portrait to staircase to library door, with methodical certainty, timing his breath to the turning of keys and the distant scrape of Mrs. Norris's claws. Gryffindor friendships become his cover story. The restricted section becomes his real classroom. The first volumes he touches are not screaming grimoires of overt curses, but essays and treatises whose danger lies in their calm. Subtle mind-influence charms, framed as behavioral corrections for the incurably criminal. Binding rituals that do not simply tie limbs, but tether magic itself. Slowing spellcasting to accrual. Pain amplification hexes described in the language of diagnostic sensitivity. And, in the deepest shelves Dumbledore has not quite purged, thin, meticulous works on the nature of the soul. Fragmentation, resonance, the theoretical possibility of anchoring consciousness outside the body. No unforgivables, not yet, but already the Slytherin timeline is diverging under his fingertips. Theory is not enough. Harry has lived too long under other people's authority to be satisfied with diagrams. His first experiment is small, almost petty, a minor compulsion lattice designed to nudge attention away, to make a guard glance left instead of right. He adapts it for a squib caretaker and a half-starved cat, weaving intent through whispered Latin as Filch shuffles toward the library doors. Mrs. Norris lifts her head. Ben looks past him. Filch's eyes slide off the invisible boy pressed against the shelves, irritable gaze snagging on a phantom scuff on the floor. He mutters, turns, and limps away. The charm holds like a held breath, then dissipates. Harry realizes his hands are shaking, not with fear, but with the aftertaste of control. For the first time, the man who locked his cupboard has been rewritten, if only for a heartbeat. They will say later that Harry hated the dark arts. They are wrong. From this night, charms and transfiguration become, in his mind, public theatre, necessary grades, plausible dieability. The real Hogwarts is the one hidden in shadows and footnotes, where every prohibition reads as a challenge, every warning as an admission of power someone is afraid to share. Dumbledore's rules cease to be moral boundaries. They become obstacles between Harry and the tools he believes he will need when war finally steps out of the abstract and into his dormitory. One night, he finds a page misfiled in a monograph on advanced bindings. A cramped, almost frantic discussion of severing magical bonds and detecting soul resonance anomalies in living hosts. The margins are scorched, as if someone tried to erase the knowledge by fire and failed. Carefully, under the cloak, Harry copies every line into a narrow, black-covered notebook. Bellatrix's old habit, resurrected in the heart of the school that once defied her. He tells himself he will only ever use it if he has to. The quill hesitates on that final word, then moves. By the time he slips back into the Gryffindor common room, laughter and chess arguments washing over him. The real first-year syllabus is already written in his pocket, a weapon being polished in the dark, waiting for the moment the war finally notices it exists. Forged in shadows, how forbidden magic rewrites Harry's core. On the surface, nothing about Harry Potter appears to have changed. He is still the boy who laughs too loudly at Ron's jokes and sprints headlong after rogue bludgers. They are wrong. In this timeline, the real divergence is quiet. Harry begins listening more than he speaks. The dark theory texts in his pocket do not just describe curses, they model a way of seeing the world as vectors of risk and leverage. So he experiments. A small omission here, a harmless lie there, telling Seamus he forgot a homework tip he in fact tested on his own parchment first. Claiming to McGonagall he only heard a rumour about the third-floor corridor instead of admitting he mapped the patrol routes. Each interaction becomes data, and his classmates slide, almost unconsciously, into mental columns of usefulness and loyalty. To Ron and Hermione, however, the public script remains intact. Harry is still the impulsive Gryffindor who charges after trolls and dives for snitches with suicidal enthusiasm. Yet internally, another process is running. While Ron is complaining about homework, Harry is calculating how much danger Ron can plausibly deny under questioning. When Hermione starts to lecture about rules, he weighs exactly which secrets her conscience could survive. Friendship becomes a layered construct, warm on the surface, but beneath it, a fortress of compartmentalized knowledge, each door labeled with who is allowed to know what. The dark texts accelerate this division by introducing an idea Hogwarts will not name for years: occlumency, not the formal discipline yet, but its emotional prototype. Harry reads about mental defenses, about sealing thoughts away from hostile legilimency, and he improvises, lying awake in his four-poster. He practices blanking his mind, pushing fear and anger into imagined rooms, and shutting the door until only a cool, observational silence remains. The boy who lived begins treating his own psyche as a castle under siege, a masterpiece to be moulded into layered wards and false corridors. The first fracture appears almost immediately, after one of those near disasters that should leave a first year shaking, Filch nearly catching them near the restricted section, or the three-headed dog's growl still echoing in his bones. Hermione notices that Harry is too calm. Her hands are trembling. His are steady. She asks, very softly, what he's not telling them, how he always seems to be one step ahead of catastrophe. For a heartbeat, the door inside his mind wavers. Then he deflects with a dry remark about getting used to trouble, lets Ron change the subject, and watches the question die in her eyes. That is the first time he chooses secrecy over trust. By the end of first year, the boy who once leapt on a troll's back has learned something more dangerous than courage, that fear can be managed, people can be nudged, and knowledge, especially forbidden knowledge, can be hoarded as power. In the Slytherin timeline of his own mind, he is already a weapon being polished in the dark, moving with methodical certainty toward a future where his calm in crisis will look less like bravery and more like soul resonance with the war that is coming. Year 1 reforged, the stone heist with illegal spells. By the time the third-floor corridor becomes more than a rumour, Harry is no longer the bewildered first-year history remembers. He is already testing how far forbidden theory will bend before it breaks. The wizarding world would say he is too young to grasp dark arts, too innocent to read about mind fracture and possession. They are wrong. His suspicion of Snape and Quirrell does not grow from childish bias in this timeline, but from pattern recognition. Quirrell's stammers do not read as fear. They read as lag, like a voice buffering through another presence. Harry has spent too many nights under his four-poster wand illuminating cramped script about parasitic soul resonance to miss the micro-delays between Quirrell's words and his eyes. When Snape mutters counter-curses at the Quidditch match, Harry does not merely think, "He's saving me." He catalogues wand movements, cross-references them with half-illegal footnotes on anti-possession wards, and files away a single conclusion. Someone else is riding Quirrell's magic. So when the stone must be protected from theft, Harry is not improvising a schoolboy escapade. He is planning a small, precise war. The midnight journey to the trapdoor becomes a heist executed with methodical certainty. Filch does not chase them, wheezing and furious, down echoing corridors. Harry meets him in a junction, eyes flat, and releases a mind fog charm he found misfiled in a treatise on battlefield triage. Legal in war, quietly banned in peace. Filch's anger fades into glassy confusion. He turns away, muttering about Bruins. Mrs. Norris, canonically an omnipresent alarm system, receives a whisper hex that blurs her scent tracking for an hour. It does not hurt. It simply erases them from her world. Even Ron's sacrifice on the chessboard is retooled. In canon, it is raw courage. Here, Harry kneels beside him beforehand and, with a steady hand, traces a pain-dampening sigil he lifted from a dark healing manual. Ron will still fall. He will simply not feel the worst of it. Bravery converted into something colder. Risk calculated and managed by a boy already behaving like a tactically lethal field medic. The confrontation with Quirrell and Voldemort, therefore, lands on a different psychological terrain. Harry does not just see a face in the back of a skull. He sees the classic profile of a parasitic soul, half bonded to failing flesh, the very case study his books warned was magically unstable. His fear is sharpened, not blunted, by understanding. He knows what happens when a soul tries to leap without an anchor. He knows he is, somehow, an anchor. So when Voldemort's presence slams toward him, trying to force its way in, Harry does not only rely on his mother's protection. Instinct reaches for theory. Somewhere in the tangle of panic and training, he half remembers a soul disruption charm, designed to jolt a possessing entity loose at the cost of scarring both host and intruder. No incantation forms. It is raw intent, shaped by forbidden diagrams burned into his memory. The backlash is catastrophic. Voldemort's scream tears the air. The body burns. The shade flees. Harry does not merely black out. He feels something inside him shear, as if a hairline fracture has been driven deeper into a structure that was never whole. In the hospital wing, the canon conversation with Dumbledore still unfolds. Sweets, evasions, the gentle cadence of a grandfatherly headmaster, yet beneath the smell of disinfectant and chocolate frogs, Dumbledore tastes the air like a duelist. The magical residue around Harry is wrong. Lily's sacrificial magic is there, bright and aching, but threaded through it is a darker filament, a faint echo of soul resonance from the disruption Harry triggered. Dumbledore does not name it. He simply adjusts his plans. The boy who lived is no longer just a child to protect or a prophecy to interpret. He is a masterpiece to be molded or contained. And as Harry drifts back to sleep, fingers unconsciously tracing patterns from restricted section diagrams on the bedsheet, the fortress of Hogwarts quietly recalibrates around a new, unspoken premise. The war is already inside its walls, wearing a school uniform and teaching himself the magic no one will admit exists. Second year, second layer, the chamber opens on a darker Harry. Second year does not open on innocence regained. It opens on a boy returning to a fortress he now understands as both sanctuary and laboratory. After surviving Voldemort's shade and tasting, however briefly, the leverage that forbidden magic offers, Harry steps off the Hogwarts Express with a quiet, unnerving resolve. He will not be surprised again. Not by trolls, not by possessed professors, not by a world that lies about what magic can really do. In this timeline, the whispers of Heir of Slytherin do not merely frighten him, they clarify his syllabus. While Ron complains about homework and Hermione trusts in rules, Harry is mapping corridors to patrol routes, memorizing prefect schedules, and timing Filch's rounds with methodical certainty. The restricted section is no longer a rumor behind a rope. It is an asset. By October, he has refined disillusionment and muffling charms into a nightly ritual, slipping between shelves of flayed leather and iron clasps, copying passages on soul theory and mind words into a cipher only he can decode. So when the diary appears, slipped from Ginny's cauldron, deceptively blank, Harry does not see a curiosity. He sees an anomaly in soul resonance, a book that feels present, a silence that listens back. Where Canon Harry would be drawn in by the novelty of ink appearing on the page, this version pauses, layers occlumency light exercises over his thoughts, and writes with the wariness of a duelist testing an unseen opponent. Tom Riddle answers not a lonely boy, but a rival mind probing for boundaries. Their conversations become a duel of omissions. Riddle offers selective memories. Harry counters with selective ignorance. He asks about memory architecture, about how sensations persist beyond the body, about what it means to anchor oneself to an object. Tom, amused, underestimates him, mistaking analytical detachment for naivete. They are wrong. Behind every question, Harry is cross-referencing diagrams from his forbidden texts, reverse engineering the diary's lattice of enchantments with the precision of a weapon being polished in the dark. Practical experiments follow. Detection charms skim the diary's surface and come back distorted, as if touching a depth that should not exist. Harry layers runes from most de potente potions, besides soul-binding schematics he should never have seen, sketching a crude, terrifying hypothesis. This is not a memory. It is a partial person, held in place by deliberate mutilation of the soul. He does not yet know the word Horcrux, but he has stared at its shadow. When Ginny weakens and the chamber opens, this Harry descends with more than courage and a phoenix on his side. In the Slytherin timeline of the chamber, he walks into that underground cathedral, already thinking in terms of anchors and severance. Facing Riddle's semi-corporeal form, he is not bewildered by the revelation of a teenage Tom. He is confirming a theory. Even as he grips the sword of Gryffindor, his free hand is tracing sigils in the damp air, improvising a disruptive pattern meant to destabilize the diary's binding. The basilisk becomes not just a monster to slay, but a conduit to exploit. As Fawkes blinds it and steel meets scale, Harry times his assault on the diary not as a desperate stab, but as a targeted strike. Fang, venom, and a whispered, half-understood, unmooring charm, driven into paper that screams like a living throat. Riddle's form shreds less like smoke and more like a severed tether. An experiment concluded in green fire. Ginny lives. Officially, it is a miracle of loyalty and luck. Unofficially, Harry walks out of the chamber, carrying more than scars. For weeks, his sleep is invaded by flashes of a prefect badge on Tom's chest, by the taste of admiration for Slughorn, by a cold clinical contempt for Muggleborns that is not his own. Dark objects prickle against his awareness like distant static. Certain corridors feel crowded even when they are empty. Dumbledore watches him with new measuring stillness, recognizing the faint echo of a magic he has spent decades suppressing. Harry says nothing. He files the experiences as data, side effects of contact with a soul fragment he nearly dismantled. To admit them would be to surrender control, and control is the one luxury he refuses to yield. The chamber is sealed, the diary destroyed. The school year resumes its pattern of classes and Quidditch. On the surface, because in the quiet hours, when the dormitory is dark and the castle breathes in ancient stone, Harry realizes something that will define the next phase of his war. Once you have heard another mind inside your own, the world never feels entirely empty again. And somewhere in that not quite silence, something else is listening back. The room that answers dark questions, third year's secret lab. That listening presence does not remain abstract for long. It answers with architecture. In the third year of the Slytherin timeline, the castle itself becomes Harry's co-conspirator. One night, after a late occlumency drill in the alpine precision of his own mind, he feels Snape's gaze hook onto him in a corridor near the 7th floor staircase. A flicker of suspicion. A professor who has finally noticed that this boy's magical aura does not match his coursework. Harry walks away. Snape follows. The air tightens into war. Driven by a primal need for concealment, Harry thinks with methodical certainty, I need a place he cannot see, cannot sense, cannot enter. The wall opposite the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy shivers. A door extrudes from stone as if the castle is exhaling a secret. Harry steps through and the world narrows to silence, so complete it feels curated. They are wrong about Hogwarts as a passive backdrop. In this timeline, the fortress is responsive, almost predatory in its attentiveness to intent. The room of requirement does not present a cozy hideout. It births a laboratory. Shelves line themselves with books that never appear in the main library catalogue. Thin, vicious volumes on soul resonance, binding theory, sympathetic curses. A cracked manual on Horcrux detection, with every page half erased as if someone tried to unwrite the knowledge instead of the ink. Practice. Dummies stand in a neat row, their surfaces etched with faint sigils that promise to simulate pain, resistance, even fear. This is not a playground. It is a weapon being polished in the dark. Within days, Harry imposes structure. He is no longer merely reading contraband pages by wandlight in bed. He is conducting trials. Each session becomes an experiment. He selects a curse or defensive counter from a restricted text, casts it on a dummy or conjured construct, then documents the results with almost academic detachment. How far does the hex travel before dispersion? What color and density does the magic take on? Does his scar prickle, burn, or pulse cold when he channels particular frequencies of power? He maps his own limits, like a strategist surveying terrain. The pattern interrupt arrives with Dementors. Most students experience them as amorphous terror. Harry, armed with obscure soul magic theory, recognizes a design. He has read in a book that should not exist that some entities do not merely feed on happiness. They create controlled soul vacuums, stabilizing ambient despair the way a ward stabilizes pressure. When Lupin introduces the Patronus, Harry does not see a simple shield of light. He sees a counter-frequency, a constructive resonance that fills the vacuum before the Dementor can. His stag is not a miracle of love alone. It is a fusion of light and dark insight, tactically lethal to creatures that operate on absence. Yet the room also brings him to an edge he refuses to cross. One evening, the shelves rearrange and present a narrow, black-bound volume detailing a proto-cruciatus and a subtle mnemonic override. Spells designed not merely to hurt or to erase, but to sculpt another mind into compliance. Harry reads the incantations, traces the wand patterns in the air without magic, and imagines using them on a Death Eater, on a hostile Auror, on Draco. The utility is undeniable, so is the cost. He closes the book. A masterpiece to be moulded must still decide what it will refuse to become. Harry walks out of the room that night knowing two things with chilling clarity: that he could break a mind if he chose, and that the next escalation in this war will try to make him prove it. And the castle, listening, quietly adjusts its doors. Friends, liabilities, or test subjects, relationships under strain. The castle adjusts. Harry does the same. Walls move for him now, not just in stone, but in people. The forbidden pages he has just closed do not stay in the room of requirement. They walk with him into every conversation, every glance, every silence. Hermione is the first to feel the dissonance, because in this timeline, she has always tracked him in footnotes and marginalia. She hears the way his answers in class begin 3 chapters ahead of the syllabus, the way he cites principles of soul resonance without ever naming their sources. When she challenges him over a risky shortcut in potions, over an oddly precise shield charm, his rebuttals are no longer about marks or house points. They become arguments about necessary risk, about acceptable collateral, about whether the law of magic is the same as the law of war. Her belief that rules are scaffolding for safety collides with his growing conviction that rules are simply the first line of enemy propaganda. They are wrong, he thinks, but he no longer says it aloud. With Ron, Harry performs a different role. Ron is Quidditch, chess, and the warm, noisy illusion that life can still be simple. Harry compartmentalizes with methodical certainty around him, sealing off the alpine cold of the room from the Gryffindor common room's fire in a crisis. A cursed necklace, a hexed broom. He now makes decisions half a second faster than Ron can process, choosing angles of intervention that assume he can absorb more darkness than anyone else. Ron sees only the aftermath, the successful save, the tired grin, the joke that deflects questions. If Ron ever understood the full chain of calculations behind those choices, he would be horrified. Harry knows this. That is why he never lets the mask slip. Dumbledore, meanwhile, becomes less mentor and more rival archivist of secrets. The headmaster's cryptic guidance, once interpreted as kindly eccentricity, now reads to Harry as deliberate withholding of critical architecture, Horcrux theory, the true nature of the scar, the deeper laws that govern unforgivable magic. In response, Harry withholds in turn. Their conversations acquire a brittle courtesy, a cold war of half-truths between two strategists who both claim to be defending the same fortress. In the Slytherin timeline of this relationship, trust is not broken in a single argument. It erodes through a series of unasked questions. Snape, however, does not need questions. He smells it, in the way Harry's countercurses shear too cleanly through hexes, in the faint aftertaste of old dark power that lingers when Harry drops his wand. A weapon being polished in the dark recognizes its own reflection. Snape's loathing sharpens into suspicion, but he is trapped by his own occluded history. To name the spells he glimpses in Harry's work would be to admit where he learned to recognize them. His reports to Dumbledore become colder, more evasive, an exercise in omission that mirrors Harry's. The strain crescendos one night at Grimmauld Place, or in a silent corner of the library, when Harry almost speaks, Sirius laughing too loudly to hide his fear, or Hermione, eyes bright with injured loyalty, gives him an opening. You're not telling us everything. For a heartbeat, he imagines laying it all out. The books, the room, the tactically lethal knowledge coiled behind his casual spells. Confession hovers on his tongue. Then he sees the likely outcomes. Their horror, Dumbledore's intervention, the loss of his only asymmetric advantage. Isolation is safer than vulnerability. He swallows the truth, feels something in him align more closely with the very enemies he studies, and walks away. The next time he raises his wand, it is with the calm of someone who has decided that no one else is allowed inside the blast radius. Goblet of Fire, Chalice of Shadows, a darker champion emerges. By the time his name erupts from the Goblet of Fire, the decision has already been made in the quiet architecture of his mind. The world sees a startled 14-year-old. In this timeline, that is camouflage, not truth. There is a flicker, barely a tremor at the corner of his mouth, when Dumbledore drags him into the antechamber, and the adults begin to argue about contracts and binding magic. Harry is not bewildered by the idea that someone wants him dead. He is studying, with methodical certainty, the sophistication required to thread his name through an age line, a confundus, and the goblet's ancient wards without leaving a trace. Someone is playing a long game with his life. He resolves, with the calm of a weapon being polished in the dark, that every forbidden contour of his private education will now be leveraged for survival. Preparation for the first task becomes less, how do I fly, and more, how do I break a dragon without breaking the law, so visibly that they drag me out in chains. In the room of requirement, the walls reshape into a stone arena. Spectral constructs of scaled beasts lunge as he tests obscure shielding patterns he scavenged from the restricted section, layering them until dragonfire skids away in a shimmering lattice rather than a blunt bubble. He refines a sensory charm that maps heat, motion, and heartbeat into lines of light along his wand arm, a crude but tactically lethal form of soul resonance that lets him feel the dragon's attention shift before it moves. What he finally uses in the arena is a borderline legal hex dredged from a footnote in a dueling manual. Technically a stunning disorientation field, practically a brief neural whiteout. That makes the Hungarian Horntail's pupils blow wide as he sprints for the egg. The crowd sees daring. The auras in the stands see a signature that should not belong to a fourth year. The second task only deepens that anomaly, where Canon Harry flails with gillyweed. This Harry walks to the Black Lake's edge, already rehearsing a detection charm derived from rituals meant to locate cursed artifacts. He strips it down, retunes it, and when he dives, the water around him becomes a three-dimensional map of pulses and echoes, each hostage a bright node in the dark. He moves with eerie efficiency, not heroism. He calculates oxygen, merfolk patrol routes, and the minimum intervention required to preserve his cover as merely reckless and good-hearted. He saves more than his own, but that, too, is strategy. Nothing hides power like the performance of virtue. The Yule Ball, in this Slytherin timeline, is not a reprieve. It is reconnaissance in dress robes. Amid glittering snow charms and string quartets, Harry watches delegations knot and unspool, Karkaroff whispering too quickly, Madame Maxime's gaze flicking to Dumbledore whenever the dark mark is mentioned, Fudge laughing too loudly whenever Voldemort's name surfaces. He dances, yes, but the awkwardness is calculated. Behind it, his eyes track alliances, the way fear of a returning Dark Lord is already reconfiguring the social geometry of the hall. The castle feels less like a school and more like a fortress staging ground. The Ministry's suspicion crystallizes quietly. Spell analysis from the first two tasks returns anomalies, precision, power, and resonance that do not fit his age profile. They are wrong about the source, muttering about raw talent and Potter luck, yet several auras quietly flag him as an outlier for long-term observation. Even Moody, Barty Crouch Jr. in scarred flesh, watches with a complicated hunger. He admires the boy he is steering toward the graveyard, but there is a sliver of fear as he realizes that the masterpiece to be molded may already be sculpting himself. By the time the maze rises, tall and whispering, Harry does not step between its hedges as prey. He walks as someone who has been studying the architect of this darkness for years, who has read between the lines of every account of Voldemort's wars and taken notes. Yet, there is an arrogance buried in that preparation, a belief that knowing the dark is akin to mastering it. When the portkey yanks him from the maze and the graveyard unfolds in cold ritual geometry, he understands, too late, that he has only ever handled echoes. The original source is waiting, and the magic he has courted will finally look back. Graveyard Ascension. When Voldemort meets his dark reflection, the graveyard receives him with clinical indifference. No cheering stands, no golden cup, only tilted stones and the geometry of a ritual designed by a mind that long ago abandoned restraint. Harry hits the ground already analyzing. In canon, this moment is framed as terror and confusion. They are wrong. In this timeline, his first instinct is audit. The runic lattice around the cauldron, the blood glyphs carved into the earth, the chant that does not merely call a body back, but reaches sideways into the torn fabric where souls fray. He recognizes, with a scholar's disgust, the same soul-splitting mechanics he has traced in forbidden Horcrux treatises Dumbledore pretended did not exist. When the bone drops, when the flesh is taken, when his own blood hits the potion, he feels it. A lurch in the scar, then a deep, dragging pull, as if a hook buried behind his eyes has been yanked taut. Soul resonance. Not metaphor, not prophecy, but a measurable, vicious tether. The reborn Voldemort exhales, and Harry's magic shudders in answer, like a tuning fork forced into harmony with a predator. The circle closes, masks gleam, wands rise. Voldemort toys with ceremony, walking the ring with the lazy cruelty of a man reacquainted with his favorite weapon. Yet, as he speaks, his gaze keeps returning to Harry's stillness, to the way the boy watches the ritual scars in the air, rather than the theatrics on the ground. A weapon being polished in the dark, he thinks, and something like curiosity flickers. The duel is meant to be theatre. It isn't. The first volley of curses from the Death Eaters comes not as a test, but as an execution. Harry has already mapped their angles. He does not dive or scramble. He lifts his wand and releases a shield he should not know. A concave, spiraled barrier, cribbed from a 17th century war grimoire that Madame Pince locked behind 3 separate enchantments. It doesn't merely block, it drinks. The incoming spells strike the surface, warp, and are spat back along their original trajectories, twisted and amplified. A cutting curse returns as a scything storm that takes a masked man's wand arm at the elbow. A casual bone breaker rebounds as a crushing impact that folds another Death Eater's chest inward with a wet, terminal crack. Silence follows, heavy and appalled. Harry does not flinch. He catalogues results. Voldemort laughs once, sharply, and the sound is wrong. Amusement curdles into fascination as he studies the boy who has just weaponized their own aggression with tactically lethal precision. In that instant, he stops seeing a prophecy pawn and starts seeing a masterpiece to be molded or dismantled. This child has walked the edge of the same abyss, using the very texts and energies Voldemort's wars dragged into the open. The Slytherin timeline has produced not a mirror image, but a divergent experiment. He adjusts his strategy in real time. Killing Harry outright now would be wasteful. Better to break him, to study the anomaly, to discover which pressures turn this austere moral calculus toward obedience or rebellion. A rival can be destroyed. A rival who believes he is still the hero can be repurposed into a far more subtle weapon. The Irrecantatum clash still happens. Wands locking in a shrieking column of light, but beneath the spectacle, Harry feels the tether between them thicken. Threads of authority and submission coiling and recoiling in the shared beam. He understands, with methodical certainty, that this is not a duel. It is a test of ownership. The auras arrive too late. Days later, their reports speak in strained, bureaucratic language about residual magics that do not match any codified school. Shield work behaving like transfiguration. Curse echoes, leaving imprints closer to ritual brands than battlefield charms. In his office-turned-fortress, Dumbledore reads, and for the first time allows himself to name what those traces mean. Harry has crossed lines he never drew for him. Voldemort, meanwhile, makes his own vow in the quiet aftermath. He will not simply try to kill the boy. He will peel back every layer, exploit every fracture, and, if possible, turn that dark, self-justifying brilliance to his own war. Because in this world, the only power more dangerous than a Dark Lord is a Dark Lord who still thinks he is saving it. And Harry Potter has already stepped over the threshold. The Ministry's Phantom, 5th year, and the invisible crime scene. By the time the Hogwarts Express pulls out for 5th year, Harry Potter is no longer just a survivor returning to school. He is a contested narrative in human form. The Ministry's smear campaign, in this timeline, acquires a distinctly darker subtext. It is not merely that Fudge calls him unstable. It is that whispered memos circulate through the Auror office about unusual magical signatures at the Little Hangleton graveyard, traces that do not match any Ministry-approved curriculum. They are wrong about many things, but not about this. The duel between Harry and Voldemort has left a residue, a warped soul resonance that unspeakables can see on their instruments, like a burn across the fabric of lore itself. Publicly, the prophet frames it as ambiguity. Perhaps the boy panicked. Perhaps in the chaos of resurrection, he reached for spells no fifth year should know. Conveniently leaked hints about non-standard hex work allow Fudge's allies to imply that Harry might have answered dark with dark, that his testimony is compromised by his own invisible crime scene. The boy who lived becomes, with bureaucratic precision, the boy who might have cheated. Inside the Order of the Phoenix, the reaction fractures along older fault lines. Moody, whose magical eye has watched Harry's dueling form in secret training sessions, argues with the bluntness of a career soldier that a tactically lethal teenager is still a teenager who can be pointed at the right target. Kingsley, passing ministry files with methodical certainty, notes that a weapon being polished in the dark is still a weapon, and in war, they do not discard functioning weapons. Molly Weasley hears only the subtext. Her children's friend has been playing with curses that once sent people to Azkaban. For her, there is no grey. There is a child, and there is the dark, and the two should never share a sentence. Hogwarts, meanwhile, is converted into a fortress of denial. Umbridge's arrival, already an active ministerial occupation, gains an additional layer of quiet panic. Her educational decrees do not just ban practical defense, they target unauthorized magical research and non-ministry approved curricula. Legalistic phrases designed to strangle exactly the kind of clandestine study that has defined Harry's adolescence. In this timeline, every confiscated text from the restricted section feels like a personal message. We know what you have been doing. Harry responds by stepping into the myth they are building around him and weaponizing it. In the Room of Requirement, Dumbledore's army becomes less a club and more a controlled experiment. He teaches advanced shields that bend killing curses without naming the rituals that taught him the geometry. He demonstrates disarming chains and silent hexes that graze the edge of legality, carefully omitting the truly forbidden sequences he keeps for himself. A two-tier system of knowledge emerges, with Harry at its apex, what he will share to prepare an army, and what he will hoard because some spells, once heard, never leave a mind. Far below the ministry atrium, the unspeakables watch this evolving pattern with clinical interest. Files on the prophecy are quietly cross-referenced with anomalous spellwork reports, with graveyard residues, with Hogwarts' newly aggressive decree schedule. The Slytherin timeline has produced a convergence that their charts were never designed to model. A boy bound to a Dark Lord by prophecy, by shared soul magic, and now by a catalogue of invisible infractions. Harry Potter is flagged in ink that does not fade as a subject of interest. The Department of Mysteries does not move yet. It waits, as only a true archive of forbidden power can wait, for the moment when prophecy, Dark Lord, and weaponized child all step into its corridors at once. And when that happens, the question will no longer be whether Harry has used forbidden magic. It will be whether anything in that place can still forbid him. Hall of Prophecy, Hall of Echoes, dark magic in the Department of Mysteries. The department does not merely receive Harry Potter in this timeline. It reacts to him. The moment his foot crosses the threshold, the air thickens, as if the corridors themselves are bracing for impact, as if prophecy has finally arrived carrying its own unauthorized annotations. In the time room, glass spheres vibrate without being touched. The great bell jar's reversed flowers stutter between bloom and decay, caught in a sympathetic stasis, with the fractured soul resonance coiled inside Harry's chest. The Death Chamber's archway hums, its whispering veil lifting a fraction, tasting the familiar wound of a boy who has already died once. Even the Hall of Thought, with its floating brains and bottled concepts, tilts toward him, recognizing not a student, but a weapon being polished in the dark. They are wrong, of course, those who insist the Department of Mysteries is neutral. In this fortress of unsolved laws, magic leans. It leans toward disruption, toward anomalies, toward the Slytherin timeline where the boy who lived arrives already fluent in spells the Ministry pretends do not exist. Every corridor becomes an amplifier. Every door a magnifying lens held over the volatile experiment that is Harry's power. When the Death Eaters spring their trap in the Hall of Prophecy, Harry does not default to Expelliarmus. He reaches for a binding hex dredged from a crumbling spine in the restricted section, cross-referenced in the Room of Requirement until he could feel its structure in his bones. The incantation is low, almost intimate, and the effect is tactically lethal. Wands fly, bodies seize, and one masked attacker collapses with a sound like glass shattering underwater. He is not merely disarmed, he is marked. Later, at St. Mungo's, healers will find thin black fissures spidering from the man's sternum, scars that do not sit on flesh or bone, but somewhere in between, as if his soul has been hairline fractured. No countercurse in their archives fits, no protocol applies. Inside the battle, the moral horror lands closer to home. Hermione hears the cadence of the spell and flinches. It sounds wrong, too close to the unforgivables they study in whispers and legal pamphlets. Ron watches a second curse lash out, meant for Dolohov, ricocheting off a shattered prophecy orb and shearing past his shoulder with a cold that bites through bone. For one suspended heartbeat, he understands that whatever Harry is wielding now, it is not school magic. Their image of him fractures in real time. Harry is still there, the friend who laughed in the common room, the boy who hated fame, but layered over him is an emerging authority, a methodical certainty that treats dark arts as tools rather than taboos. The cognitive dissonance is brutal. It feels like watching a masterpiece to be molded, while realizing the sculptor might be war itself. Then Sirius falls. The archway's veil ripples. Bellatrix's laughter cuts through the hall, and in the split second where canon would simply give us grief, this Harry reaches for something worse, a half-learned anchoring charm, a forbidden construct designed to snag a departing soul and drag it back from the threshold. The words tear out of him, raw, misaccented, driven by panic rather than calculation. For a moment, it works, or seems to. The veil convulses, Sirius's outline flickers, and a voice, impossibly distant yet pressed against Harry's ear, whispers his name with a confusion that will haunt him. Then the magic snaps. The archway reasserts its jurisdiction. Silence returns, but it is not clean. It is crowded with echoes. In the aftermath, Unspeakables review the traces. Their internal report is clinical, almost reverent. Whatever Harry Potter is becoming, he is no longer just a student. He is a living experiment at the convergence of prophecy, dark arts, and the old love magic Dumbledore once romanticized. And the world has no protocol for handling that. So they do the only thing institutions ever do with unprecedented weapons. They start drafting contingencies and watching to see whether Harry will notice that he is now an object of study, even as he prepares for a war no one understands. Horcrux lessons, unauthorized, 6th year's forbidden seminar. Harry notices when Dumbledore finally speaks the word Horcrux in that high, quiet office, he is not detonating a revelation. He is confirming a hypothesis. The wizarding world imagines this is the moment the boy who lived learns the true scale of Voldemort's depravity. They are wrong. In this timeline, Harry has already traced the edges of soul fragment theory in restricted section manuscripts that pretended not to be about what they were undeniably about. So he performs a flicker of confusion, a tightening of the jaw, the practiced cadence of a student slightly out of his depth. Internally, he is mapping terminology to prior readings with methodical certainty. The rending Dumbledore describes aligns with the shearing rituals buried in an anonymous Alpine grimoire. The concept of anchoring matches the fixed locus of soul resonance from a book that had no business being in a school library. Dumbledore thinks he is guiding a child through horror. In reality, he is supplying data to a strategist. The office memories, Tom Riddle in the orphanage, in the shop, in the room of requirement, become, for Harry, not morality tales, but field reports. That night, he claims insomnia and walks straight to the room, pacing until the door yields not a junk-filled cathedral, but a narrow, stone-walled archive, shelves of cracked tomes, trays of damaged amulets, a faint metallic taste in the air, a laboratory for a weapon being polished in the dark. Here he reconstructs and then surpasses the lesson, using half-finished detection charms cribbed from soul magic texts. He designs probes that skim for unnatural echoes in metal, ink, and bone. He tests them against cursed lockets, whispering masks, a broken diadem that hums with such pressure he has to stop before his nose bleeds. Each iteration refines his personal toolkit for hunting Horcruxes, turning Hogwarts itself into a silent proving ground. The cost accumulates quietly. Exposure to those warped fields of power grinds against the already compromised scar. Sleep fractures into jagged fragments of Voldemort's memories and his own, overlaid without warning. Harry wakes with spells on his tongue that he has never consciously studied, with moods that are not quite his, cold rages, sudden contempt, a hollow amusement at the idea of mercy. There are moments, staring at his reflection in the dark glass of the common room, when he is not entirely sure whose thought arrived first, his, the scars, or the diary's lingering ghost. The Half-Blood Prince's textbook arrives like a mirror. Its margin notes, all ruthless efficiency and borderline violent experimentation, feel less like guidance and more like a conversation between predators. Harry merges that brutal pragmatism with his forbidden research, splicing soul detection runes into combat hexes, designing spells that do not merely disarm, but disrupt the subtle threads of identity. Each success is tactically lethal. Each success shaves a sliver off his capacity for uncomplicated empathy. Dumbledore feels the shift before he understands it. In their subsequent meetings, Harry anticipates conclusions, asks questions that presuppose knowledge he should not have, flinches half a second before the word fragment is spoken, as if already hearing it. The headmaster has spent decades categorizing dark wizards. This boy does not fit the schema. A masterpiece to be molded, or a future rival whose authority will not be negotiable. The tragedy is simple. By accelerating Harry's education, Dumbledore has created a partner in the Horcrux war. By withholding, he has driven that partner into the arms of the very darkness he fears. As winter closes around the castle like a fortress, he begins to suspect that if he falls, the Slytherin timeline will not merely inherit a weapon against Voldemort, it will inherit a wizard who has learned that souls themselves are negotiable. And someone is already testing that theory on Malfoy. Unforgivable thresholds. When Harry crosses the legal line, the first true test arrives, not in a grand battle, but in domestic chaos. The burrow burns. In this timeline, the Weasley home is not a whimsical refuge, but a declared target, a symbol of Dumbledore's remaining moral authority. The Death Eaters strike at dusk, wards screaming, sky split open by green and orange. Harry is there only because Molly insisted on one normal dinner, as if a weapon being polished in the dark could be softened by stew and hand-knitted jumpers. They are wrong. The scene fractures quickly into corridors of smoke and splintered wood. Harry moves with methodical certainty, transfiguring debris into shields, snapping off silent hexes that leave masked figures convulsing in the mud. For a time, the legal arsenal holds stunners, shields, cutting curses calibrated to maim but not kill. He is tactically lethal without crossing the line the Ministry pretends still matters. Then someone screams Ginny's name. On the back lawn, near the pond, a masked witch has Ginny Weasley on her knees, wand pressed to the girl's throat, in a parody of execution. Two more Death Eaters fan out, forming a triangle of killing angles. Harry is already moving, already calculating. Disarm, shield, bind. He cycles through options like chess lines, fires the textbook answers in rapid sequence. They fail. Shields shatter under coordinated curses. A blasting hex chews a crater where his last cover stood. Ginny's eyes lock on his, wide and furious, because she has already watched one timeline's Harry fail to save her. The resonance of that unspoken accusation slams into him harder than any spell. The choice is not sudden. It has been incubating for years in the alpine silence of Lestrange libraries, in the room of requirements' forbidden shelves, in conversations with Bellatrix, where unforgivable was a political term, not a moral one. When his wand lifts now, it is not in panic. It is in acceptance. Imperio. The word leaves his mouth like a confession and a verdict. The magic that answers is heavier than any charm he has ever cast. A dark current that seems to recognize him, to slot perfectly into grooves carved by long study and soul resonance. There is no resistance. The nearest Death Eaters will snaps like rotten twine. With eerie calm, the man pivots, raises his wand, and unleashes a killing curse into his comrade's spine. Silence follows, obscene against the crackle of the burning house. Ginny staggers free, staring at the collapsing bodies. The surviving Death Eater's mask tilts toward Harry, eyes blank with borrowed obedience. For a heartbeat, Harry holds that mind like a puppet on a single invisible string and feels something cold and exultant bloom in his chest. Power, absolute and unanswerable. The horror comes a second later, when the puppet's body hits the ground and the Imperius lifts, leaving only a corpse and the echo of obedience. Ginny's face is the mirror he cannot evade. Terror, gratitude, and dawning comprehension that this is not Dumbledore's Harry. Not anymore. He tells himself it was necessary. A one-time deviation in a war that has already rewritten every rule. The Ministry would have sent him to Azkaban for less. The Ministry is irrelevant. He files the memory away as tactical precedent, not moral failure, even as he knows the barrier is gone and cannot be rebuilt. So when, later, he carves Cruciatus into Bellatrix's nerves in the Department of Mysteries, or threads Imperius through a goblin mind in Gringotts, it is a return, a continuation of the night the Slytherin timeline watched Harry Potter cross the unforgivable threshold and did nothing to pull him back. Voldemort's new obsession, shaping or shattering the dark air. Voldemort adjusts faster than the world does. While the Ministry still files Harry's use of Cruciatus as battle stress, and Dumbledore frames it as a tragic aberration, the Dark Lord reads it with methodical certainty. This is not a Gryffindor who snapped. This is a boy who has practiced, a weapon being polished in the dark. In this timeline, that realization triggers a pivot as clean and cold as a blade being turned. Voldemort stops speaking of Harry as a sentimental child corrupted by Bellatrix and starts speaking of him, privately, to the inner circle, as a rogue heir to the dark arts tradition, an unsanctioned offshoot of his own philosophy, a masterpiece to be molded or a rival to be annihilated before its full maturation. There is no third category. His war against Harry becomes, beneath the curses and corpses, a recruitment campaign, not the clumsy "join me" of a graveyard ultimatum, but a slow, invasive pedagogy. Cursed lockets arrive at Hogwarts by hands that never know their origin, whispering in parcel tongue about soul resonance and the precise mechanics of pain. Dream visions slip past Harry's occlumency, alpine corridors of impossible libraries, shelves stacked with volumes that were quietly removed from the restricted section decades ago. In those dreams, the books open themselves, and a disembodied voice explains, patiently, how one might refine Cruciatus to target memory, or bend Imperius into a permanent personality rewrite. Voldemort frames it all as recognition, as kinship. They fear what you are becoming, the visions tell Harry, because they have never walked this far into the dark. Only Voldemort, the implication runs, understands that Harry's soul can fracture and still cast Patronus light. Only Voldemort knows what it means to be both weapon and wielder. Their duels, when they finally meet wand to wand, read less like battles and more like dissertations hurled at lethal velocity. A chain of silent, cutting curses from Harry is answered by a web of blood wards from Voldemort, not merely to block, but to test whether Harry recognizes the archaic rune structure. When Harry transfigures rubble into a shield that drinks killing curses instead of deflecting them, Voldemort laughs, not with joy, but with the terrible satisfaction of a thesis confirmed. How far will you go? That laugh asks. Will you carve your ethics into the spellwork, or let the spellwork carve you? The irony is corrosive. Voldemort, who tore his soul apart to escape death, finds himself confronted by a living contradiction. a boy whose soul is damaged, contaminated, and yet still capable of loyalty that is not purely transactional, of love that is not a strategic mask. Each time Harry refuses to sacrifice Hermione for tactical advantage, yet still reaches for an unforgivable. When cornered, it undermines the Dark Lord's entire cosmology. If corruption is not binary, if power and attachment can coexist, then his own mutilation was not an ascension. They are wrong, he thinks, about who should fear whom, because his ultimate terror is no longer that Harry will kill him in some public courtyard. It is that Harry will surpass him, becoming a dark authority who can inspire fanatical loyalty through genuine attachment as well as fear. A sovereign who turns Hogwarts into a fortress not of ideology but of cold protective devotion. So Voldemort escalates. The cursed gifts grow more intimate, the visions more persuasive, the lessons more tailored. And one night, Harry opens a book that does not merely teach forbidden magic. It offers him a way to rewrite what a Dark Lord is. He hesitates only once. Hallows, Horcruxes, and the temptation to cheat death properly. Harry closes the book only to find it echoing everywhere. Because once you have read a precise description of how to cut the soul, the tale of the three brothers is no longer a bedtime story. In the Slytherin timeline, when Xenophilius sketches the Hallows on a grubby table and Hermione dismisses the legend, Harry is silent for a different reason. To him, the tale reads as a coded thesis on death. The first brother as domination, the second as evasion, the third as acceptance. 3 methodologies, 3 research programs, and in the quiet between sentences, he recognizes himself uncomfortably distributed across all 3. He has already stolen power from death once, as an unintended Horcrux and as a weapon being polished in the dark by Bellatrix's pedagogy. He has already used soul resonance to track fragments of Voldemort across the world with methodical certainty. Yet he is also the boy who walked willingly into the forest to die. The story does not feel distant. It feels diagnostic. When he learns the Hallows are not metaphor but hardware, an unbeatable wand, a stone that manipulates the boundary, a cloak that erases presence, the temptation is not childish greed, it is intellectual, clinical. The Elder Wand in his hands is not merely a dueling advantage. Combined with his forbidden understanding of soul binding, it becomes a theoretical stabilizer. If raw dark magic tears the soul, could a wand engineered for absolute authority over force and form allow a cleaner incision, a reversible partition, a safer Horcrux? The thought revolts him. And it will not leave. During the Horcrux hunt, that internal argument is conducted in parallel with a more visible evolution. In this timeline, Harry does not blunder into cursed artifacts. He feels them before they are named. The locket's presence presses against his wards long before Mundungus's confession, a greasy pressure in the air like humidity before a storm. The diadem in the Room of Requirement is not discovered by chance. He follows a whispering dissonance in the castle's magical architecture, reading Hogwarts as a living web and the Horcrux as a malignant knot. Nagini is worse. When he finally faces her, he does not just see a snake, he sees the lattice of Voldemort's will braided through living tissue, an obscene graft of mind and meat. He understands with tactically lethal clarity how he might replicate the technique, how he might refine it. The pattern interrupt comes in a tent, in winter, when the war feels already lost. Harry's sketches, on rough parchment, are designed for a failsafe, not a full Horcrux, but a lesser anchor, a calibrated echo that would drag his consciousness back if he falls in the final confrontation. No murder, he tells himself. No ripping, a mere displacement of resonance. Hermione sleeps 3 feet away, trusting him with the watch, unaware that he is planning to cheat his own death. He burns the parchment before dawn, but the fact that he could articulate the spellwork at all marks how far he has travelled from the boy Dumbledore once tried to shepherd, which is why, at King's Cross, their conversation alters. It is no longer only about love and sacrifice, it is a viva voce on the ethics of knowledge. Dumbledore does not simply apologise for secrets. He interrogates what Harry did with the truths he stole, and what he nearly chose to become. Harry, for his part, admits the temptation to perfect Voldemort's work rather than erase it. The old man offers no law, only a frame. Power as inquiry versus power as verdict. When Harry walks back into his body, he is not merely choosing to die again for others. He is choosing, deliberately, not to become the architect of a new, safer immortality. For now, final battle, forbidden edge. How dark magic ends the war. He returns to a world on fire. The Battle of Hogwarts in this timeline is not a chaotic last stand. It is the unveiling of a weapon being polished in the dark. Stone, sky, and spellfire become the frame for Harry's final experiment, whether forbidden knowledge can end a war faster than heroism ever could. He moves through the castle as both commander and weapon. With a flick of his wand and a murmured Aramaic formula dredged from the restricted section, he drops translucent, hex-eating wards over entire stairwells, sheathing clusters of fighters in shimmering domes that drink curses rather than block them. These are not textbook shields. They are parasitic barriers, feeding on hostile magic and routing the excess into pre-inscribed runes that overload enemy wands 2 corridors away. Under his direction, Hogwarts ceases to be a school and becomes a fortress, running on predatory geometry. At the same time, his attention is elsewhere, deeper. Threads of soul resonance hum at the edge of his perception, a network he has trained himself to feel in silence. Amid the screams and collapsing masonry, he can taste the difference between an ordinary human aura and the splintered, abrasive frequency of a Horcrux. Horcrux bearing Death Eaters do not get duels. They get neutralized with frightening, tactically lethal precision. Their wands slagged, their minds stunned, their bodies tagged for later interrogation. He is triaging reality. Individual confrontations become case studies in applied heresy. When Bellatrix breaks through a collapsing archway, laughing, her curses fraying the last of Molly Weasley's strength, Harry does not answer with red or green. He uses a hex Bellatrix herself, once described in a whisper, and then dismissed as too elegant for war. The impact is invisible. Bellatrix simply convulses, her magic imploding inward as her core fractures like spun glass. She lives. She screams. Her wand goes dead in her hand, and for the first time, Bellatrix Lestrange experiences powerlessness as a permanent condition. Nagini is worse. Tracked through the melee by that rasping Horcrux resonance, she lunges from a shattered window toward Neville. Harry's response is a soul-severing strike that leaves the snake's body unmarked, coiling in bewildered reflex as the embedded fragment is ripped free and annihilated mid-air, a dark smear erased by white fire. The witnesses do not know what they have seen. They only feel a pressure lift, like a storm receding. By the time Voldemort calls for parley in the Great Hall, the war is already mathematically over. What remains is the question of escape. Voldemort believes, as always, that death is negotiable. They are wrong, those who think this final duel is only about wand law and Elder Wand allegiance. It is about a boy who has diagrammed the human soul and closed every exit. When their spells collide, Harry is not merely trusting the wand's loyalty. He is watching the ripples in the unseen field, prepared for any last-ditch projection of consciousness into snake, corpse, or bystander. When Voldemort's body falls, Harry's follow-up is silent and unseen, a binding lattice that clamps down on the departing shard and grinds it into conceptual dust. The hall's reaction is fractured. Allies cheer, then falter, remembering the way Harry's earlier curses had unmade opponents without blood, how he had stepped past twitching bodies with clinical assessment rather than grief. Gratitude curdles into unease. Surviving Death Eaters whisper later about a boy who moved like a Dark Lord wearing the wrong colours. When the sun rises, Voldemort is gone, but the magic Harry has worked lingers, a faint metallic taste in the air, hairline fractures in the castle's ancient wards, a new, colder resonance in Harry's own aura. The Slytherin timeline has its victory, yet the question hangs over the smoking battlements. What kind of peace can be built on foundations scorched by such power? For now, no one demands an answer. Aftermath, trials, taboos, and the price of knowing too much. Peace arrives with flowers, medals, and a file number. In the first weeks after Voldemort's execution, the Ministry publicly wraps Harry in gratitude while quietly building a case file thick enough to wedge a door. The Wizengamot chambers echo with rehearsed speeches about sacrifice and victory. In adjacent warded rooms, unspeakables pass around transcripts of incantations no one will admit hearing. In this timeline, the state thanks its weapon in daylight and dissects him in the dark. The debates are clinical, almost bloodless. Did he employ unforgivables repeatedly? And if so, under what battlefield exigencies? Were the Transfiguration warped corpses in the Forbidden Forest an unavoidable consequence of war? Or proof of research that brushes Horcrux theory and soul resonance? One faction argues prosecution is a methodical certainty if the law is to mean anything. Another whispers that jailing the boy who ended the war would shatter what little faith remains in magical authority. A third, the most pragmatic and therefore the most dangerous, proposes amending the statutes, retroactively legalizing what Harry did, then burying the amendments under a mountain of classification. They are wrong about one thing. They imagine the danger is over because the duel is finished. The real instability is social, not tactical. As stories seep out of Hogwarts as fortress, of shields that turned killing curses back on their casters, of hexes that left Death Eaters screaming without visible wounds, the public narrative fractures. To some, Harry becomes a necessary monster, the tactically lethal counterweight history demanded to balance Voldemort. To others, especially those who lost family in friendly, magical crossfire, he is simply another Dark Lord who happened to stop at one. In pubs from Diagon Alley to Hogsmeade, people lower their voices when his name comes up. The boy who lived has become the man who did what should never be done. Harry, for his part, reacts not with defiance, but with retreat. The room of requirement, once a clandestine laboratory, remains sealed behind layers of his own wards. He does not go back. Grimoire pages are locked in a trunk within a trunk, nested like curses, sunk under the floorboards of Grimmauld Place. He refuses oral office requests for advanced curses training, offering only sanitized shield drills where the real edge has been filed off. Yet in quiet moments, when someone startles him or a corridor feels too narrow, his thoughts still snap into those old clinical patterns, angles, nerves, leverage, like a wand flicking to a familiar grip. Relationships do not escape unscathed. Hermione insists on sunlight, full documentation, ethical frameworks, formal oversight committees, so that no one ever again becomes a weapon being polished in the dark. Ron wants none of it. He treats the war like a cursed object, best left unopened, and flinches when Hermione and Harry argue about research protocols over tea. Ginny, or the partner who remains, faces a simpler, harsher question. Can she share a bed with a man whose Patronus has dimmed from blazing stag to something thinner, edged with a faint, metallic halo that was never there before? Because the scars are not only on skin. Certain enchanted mirrors show Harry with a faint shadow lagging half a heartbeat behind his reflection. Sensitive creatures, shy from the altered resonance of his aura. Even his magic feels different to him now, heavier, as if every spell drags a chain. The Slytherin timeline has its victor, but the world is beginning to ask, in whispers first, and then more loudly, what happens when a masterpiece to be molded refuses the chisel, yet cannot quite put it down? The answer will not stay buried in sealed archives for long. Redemption Arc, or Origin Story, the two futures of Dark Harry. The answer fractures along a single axis. What Harry does with the knowledge he refuses to surrender. In this timeline, forbidden magic is not a phase or a teenage rebellion. It is a language he thinks in, a grammar of control etched into his nerves. The question is whether he ever chooses to translate it into something other than domination. One future traces the path of reform. Here, the boy who walked the Department of Mysteries and heard prophecies crack around him decides that secrecy is the real contagion. He does not renounce the dark texts from the restricted section or the room of requirements' hidden archives. Instead, he drags them into the light. Hermione is the first convert, not to the spells themselves, but to the premise that ignorance is tactically lethal. Together, with a handful of disillusioned unspeakables, they begin designing what is effectively a containment curriculum. In that version of the Slytherin timeline, Harry becomes an Auror in name, but a magical theorist in practice, an authority whose battlefield is the law. He specializes in dark containment, dismantling cursed artifacts, unspooling layered blood wards, and, when the war dust settles, standing in Azkaban's visiting rooms with former Death Eaters. He argues, calmly, relentlessly, that method and intent must be separated in legislation, that an Imperius used to pull a child out of a burning house is not the same crime as an Imperius used to build an army. They are wrong, he says. Those who insist all forbidden magic is inherently corrupting. What corrupts is the combination of power and denial. But there is another trajectory, and it is uncomfortably plausible. In that future, the same Harry accepts every emergency as an exception, and every exception as precedent. One more use of Imperius on an uncooperative witness, only this once. One more classified ritual in a sealed chamber of the Department of Mysteries, never reported because the world is not ready. One more decision to erase a memory rather than endure a public panic. The compromises are microscopic in isolation. Together, they are a weapon being polished in the dark. Years pass. The boy who raged against Dumbledore's manipulations wakes up one morning and realizes he occupies the same vantage point. Omniscient files, secret prisons, a network of oaths and debts that make open opposition nearly impossible. The fortress he builds around the world is justified in the language of safety and post-war trauma, but its corridors look suspiciously like the Alpine estate where Bellatrix first taught him that love and control could share the same room. The pivot between these futures is not ideology. It is whether he ever truly processes what was done to him and what he did in return. Trauma and power have a cruel resonance. If he confronts the seduction he felt casting his first Cruciatus, if he admits that forbidden magic made him feel less helpless long before it made him more effective, redemption becomes a methodical certainty rather than a pious hope. If he buries that recognition under work, titles, and a growing cult of personality, the slide is almost invisible until it is complete. The Slytherin timeline does not choose for him. Both seeds are already in the soil. The reformer who turns his worst mistakes into a cautionary syllabus, and the strategist who becomes the very invisible hand he once vowed to break. Which Harry feels inevitable to you may say more about your faith in people with power than about the boy who lived through war, and the world will only realize which future it received when it is already living inside his design. Rewriting the legend. How one secret choice changes everything. The illusion the world clings to is simple. Change one decision and you only nudge the margins of fate. In this timeline, that illusion dies on a Thursday night in 1991, when an 11-year-old boy slips under an invisibility cloak and into the restricted section, and decides that fear on a page is less terrifying than helplessness in a corridor. From that single act, a secret syllabus unfolds. What begins as furtive reading on counter curses becomes a curriculum of cursed fire, binding oaths and soul resonance theory, reinforced later in the Room of Requirements, hidden libraries. The Chamber of Secrets is no longer a desperate duel of luck and loyalty. It becomes a controlled kill box where Harry uses basilisk venom with methodical certainty, weaponizing the corpse as much as the victory. The Triwizard Tournament shifts from improvised heroism to premeditated spectacle. Wards bent, contracts dissected, dragons subdued with borderline illegal compulsion magic that leaves the judges applauding, and moody Voldemort's agent taking notes. By the time the Department of Mysteries fractures around him, the divergence is total. Harry does not stumble into the Hall of Prophecy. He enters as a tactically lethal variable, who has already mapped likely ambush vectors, who knows exactly how far he can push a cutting curse before it becomes manslaughter. The battle is shorter, sharper, and more fatal for the Death Eaters, who underestimate a schoolboy wielding magic their parents only whispered about. When the Horcrux hunt finally begins, it is not a scavenger trail of lucky guesses. It is an academic thesis in annihilation, conducted by someone who has read the texts, Dumbledore quietly removed from the Hogwarts shelves. The thematic axis tilts with him. Canon insists that love conquers all. They are wrong to think that is the only moral available. Here, knowledge sits beside love as an equal, dangerous twin, capable of salvation or ruin, depending on whether it is shared as shield or hoarded as sword. Harry's power is no longer just sacrificial protection. It is a weapon being polished in the dark, a masterpiece to be molded by whoever reaches him first. Through that lens, every relationship warps. Hermione becomes both conscience and co-author, the one who insists on ethical footnotes in the margins of every forbidden spell, yet still helps him refine them because ignorance to her is the greater sin. Ron remains the grounding presence, the reminder of Quidditch and sandwiches and human scale. But Harry keeps him at arm's length, quarantining him from the worst rituals as if morality itself were contagious. Dumbledore oscillates between mentor and warden, tightening access, deleting books, and in the same gesture, driving Harry deeper underground. Voldemort, sensing the echo of himself, briefly becomes an inadvertent tutor, his attacks serving as live fire exams in the very darkness he once believed only he could master. The paradox is brutal. This Harry is more competent, more prepared. Certain casualties never happen. Certain battles end before they begin. Yet every life saved adds another ethical scar. Memories of screams under Cruciatus used strategically, of Imperius cast on enemies who never consented to become test cases. Hogwarts survives as a fortress, but the boy at its center no longer fits the world's definition of innocent. So the question circles back to you. If this path guaranteed Voldemort's defeat, would you sanction it, knowing the cost in Harry's psyche and soul? At what point does survival, purchased with forbidden knowledge, cease to be victory and become a quiet, unspoken surrender to the very darkness you thought you were outsmarting? Your turn in the restricted section. What would you choose? And now, the axis tilts away from Harry and back toward you. Strip away the prophecy, the nostalgia, the safety of knowing how the canon timeline ends, and stand in the dark with him, 11 years old, fresh from a cupboard, ribs still counting themselves beneath 2 large robes, the world suddenly chanting your name, while you flinch at raised hands and closing doors. A librarian gestures, just once, toward a chained volume that promises you will never be that helpless again. Do you close it, as the world insists you should, or do you read one page, one spell, and then another? In this timeline, that is the only real divergence, not a murder averted, but a decision delayed in the silence of the restricted section. So choose your fracture point. Would you have stopped after first year, after using forbidden lore to understand the Horcrux in Kirill's skull, and then swearing never to touch that power again? Would you have refused, on principle, to cast unforgivables in open war, even when a single Imperius could have turned a Death Eater into a shield? Even when a Cruciatus might have broken Bellatrix's will before she killed someone you loved? Or does your imagination move further into the dark, toward the question most characters never dare articulate? If Horcrux magic is a masterpiece of soul engineering, would you have tried to redesign it, to build a cleaner immortality, a gentler fragmentation, a soul resonance that anchors without tearing? At what point does intellectual curiosity become a weapon being polished in the dark? And at what point does refusing to think become its own kind of surrender? They are wrong. The adults who insist this is only a wizarding dilemma, the tension between safety and knowledge, law and necessity, is not confined to a castle library. It echoes through every debate about weapons research, about artificial intelligence, about who is permitted to understand the mechanisms that could unmake the world. When ministries and ministries by another name declare a field forbidden, are they protecting you or protecting their monopoly on power? So, in the comments, be concrete. Mark the line you would not cross. Do you shut the book in first year, walk away from the restricted section, and trust Dumbledore's paternal authority? Do you fight the war but refuse the unforgivables, even if it means more graves in the Hogwarts grounds? Or do you go further than Harry, treating dark arts as code to be refactored, convinced that you can hold your own mind as a fortress against corruption? And if this Slytherin timeline of forbidden study intrigues you, choose the next branch. What if Hermione, not Harry, became the dark arts scholar of Hogwarts, cataloguing every curse with academic detachment until morality itself felt like an inefficient variable? What if Dumbledore had trained Harry openly in banned magic, turning him into a tactically lethal guardian instead of a secret experiment? What if Voldemort, sensing that resonance, chose a different heir entirely? Tell me which timeline you want dissected next. Picture, as you decide, the restricted section after curfew, shelves fading into black, chains hanging slack, the castle breathing in its sleep. One book glows faintly on the highest shelf, title worn to illegibility, pages humming with methodical certainty. An unseen hand rises into frame, hesitates, then closes around the spine. The world will call what happens next destiny. You know better. It's a choice. Make yours below.